From $1 kids Kinder Joy being banned to serious radar jammers that will get you inside jail. Let's start. First up, and this one genuinely surprises people, is the radar jammer. Not a radar detector, those are mostly fine depending on your state. A radar detector just receives signals and tells you when a cop's radar gun is nearby. A radar jammer actively transmits its own signal to confuse and scramble the police radar equipment so it can't get an accurate speed reading on your car. That distinction is everything because one is a passive little receiver and the other is basically an electronic attack on law enforcement equipment. The FCC and federal law treat radar jammers as illegal devices under the Communications Act, and if you get caught with one, you're not just looking at a traffic ticket, you're potentially looking at federal charges, fines in the thousands, and your jammer getting confiscated on the spot. The interesting thing is that a lot of people buy these online thinking they're getting a super detector or some upgraded version of the legal ones, and they have absolutely no idea they just bought something that could get them federally charged. Customs actually pulls these out of packages regularly. The market for them exists in this shady online gray zone where sellers are clearly aware they're shipping something illegal into the US, and buyers are mostly just clueless. GPS jammers fall into a similar category and are arguably even more dangerous. Because when someone fires up a GPS jammer to hide their location, usually truckers trying to dodge fleet tracking systems, which is honestly a whole other conversation, they end up knocking out GPS signals for everyone nearby, including emergency services, air traffic systems, and regular people just trying to use Google Maps. The FAA has documented cases where GPS jammers used by truckers near airports caused legitimate navigation issues for incoming aircraft. So yeah, the ban on these makes complete sense, but people are still buying and using them constantly. Next one is something that sounds almost comically harmless until you understand what it actually does, and that's the signal jammer, specifically cell phone and Wi-Fi jammers. These are devices that broadcast radio frequency noise across the bands that cell phones and Wi-Fi routers use, and they effectively create a dead zone where no wireless communication works. You've probably seen them marketed online with pitches like perfect for restaurants, classrooms, movie theaters, and they seem like a reasonable solution to annoying phone behavior in public spaces. The problem is that the FCC has made it crystal clear that these are illegal to own, sell, import, or operate in the US. No exceptions, no loopholes, no "but I'm only using it in my own house" defense. The reason is actually pretty alarming when you think it through. A cell jammer doesn't selectively block your kid's YouTube. It blocks everything. Every phone in range loses signal, which means if someone in that building has a medical emergency and needs to call 911, they can't. If someone's being assaulted and needs help, they can't call. The jammer has no way of knowing the difference between a teenager watching videos and a parent calling an ambulance. The FCC has handed out fines exceeding $100,000 for a single violation and has coordinated with the DOJ to actually prosecute people criminally over these devices. There was a guy in Florida who installed a jammer on his commuter bus because he was tired of hearing people talk on their phones during his commute. Which, honestly, relatable, but he ended up under federal investigation and facing serious consequences. A school principal in Maryland tried to install one to keep students off their phones during the school day, and the FCC came down hard on that too. The intent doesn't matter. The technology creates an unacceptable public safety risk, and the government takes it seriously in a way that a lot of other tech regulations just don't get enforced. Third gadget is one that's going to feel very niche but has an absolutely fascinating backstory, and that's the Sten gun kit or any similar solvent trap kit that gets converted into an unregistered suppressor. Okay, stay with me here because the legal lines around this one are genuinely complicated and interesting. A solvent trap is technically a legal firearm cleaning accessory. It's a tube that attaches to the barrel of your gun and catches the solvent runoff when you're cleaning it. Completely legal, sold openly, used by a lot of gun owners legitimately. The ATF has no problem with solvent traps as solved, but these kits are also almost perfectly designed to be converted into functional suppressors with minimal modification, and suppressors in the US are heavily regulated under the National Firearms Act. You need to register them, pay a $200 tax stamp, go through an extensive background check, and wait months for approval. An unregistered suppressor is a federal felony. So what happened is that solvent trap kits became a massive gray market product where manufacturers and sellers were clearly winking at the fact that their cleaning kits would be drilled out and used as suppressors, and buyers were purchasing them with full knowledge of what they actually were. The ATF has been cracking down on these for years, conducting raids and prosecuting people, and the specific kits that are designed to be obviously converted, where the only realistic use case is making an illegal suppressor, are banned. It's one of those situations where the product exists in a legal space based on its stated purpose, but is effectively banned based on its obvious actual purpose. And the ATF has become increasingly aggressive about treating intent and design as the relevant legal factor, rather than just what the product is technically labeled as. Fourth one is genuinely something most people have never heard of, and that's the Kinder Surprise Egg. This one isn't exactly a gadget in the traditional sense, but it absolutely qualifies as a banned consumer product with a tech/toy component, and the reason it's banned is so bureaucratically American that it almost feels like satire. The US has a law, the Child Safety Protection Act, that prohibits toys with small parts from being embedded inside food products sold to children under 3 because of choking hazards. Kinder eggs, those little chocolate eggs with a toy capsule inside that every European kid grows up with, violate this law. The Consumer Product Safety Commission and US Customs have been confiscating Kinder eggs at the border for decades. People get them taken away coming back from international trips. Packages from relatives in Europe get opened and emptied, and technically you can be fined $2,500 per egg for importing them. Per egg. Now, the interesting twist is that Kinder did eventually introduce a US legal version called Kinder Joy, which separates the chocolate and the toy into two halves of the egg, so the toy is never actually embedded in the food. And that version is totally fine to sell here. But the original classic Kinder Surprise, with the capsule inside the chocolate shell, is still contraband. People treat this as a funny quirk, and it is kind of funny, but it speaks to something real about how the US regulatory system works, where a product that's been sold safely to children in over 100 countries for 50 years is banned here because of a law that was written before the product even existed in this market. Last one, and this is the one that genuinely feels most futuristic and most alarming at the same time, is certain types of high-powered handheld laser devices. Not your standard laser pointer. The little red dot thing for presentations is totally fine. We're talking about handheld lasers in the blue and green spectrum that output above 5 milliwatts, which is the legal limit set by the FDA for handheld consumer laser products. The reason these exist in a banned category is that the internet made it incredibly easy to import powerful handheld lasers from Chinese manufacturers that advertise as 5 MW but actually output anywhere from 50 to 1,000 milliwatts. These things are genuinely scary. A 500 MW green laser can start fires, can permanently blind you in a fraction of a second from across a room, and can blind a pilot in a cockpit from the ground at distances that sound impossible until you see the beam dispersion numbers. The FAA tracks laser strikes on aircraft as a serious aviation safety issue. There are thousands of incidents reported every year where someone on the ground hits a cockpit with one of these things, temporarily blinding or disorienting the pilots during approach or takeoff. That's not a prank, that's a potential mass casualty event, and the people doing it are usually not malicious. They just bought a cheap laser online and had no idea how powerful it actually was. The FDA and CBP confiscate enormous quantities of these lasers at ports of entry. Selling them is clearly illegal, importing them is illegal, and yet they flood in constantly because the profit margins are good and enforcement at the consumer level is pretty inconsistent. If you've ever seen those YouTube videos where someone's burning through a balloon or lighting a match with a handheld laser from across the room, almost every single one of those devices is federally illegal to own in the United States, which honestly makes those videos a lot more interesting to watch in retrospect. The common thread through all of these is that none of them are banned because the government is being arbitrarily controlling. There's a real safety or public interest reason behind every single one of these restrictions. The jammers block emergency calls. The radar and GPS jammers create navigation hazards. The laser devices blind pilots. The suppressor kits circumvent weapons regulations. Even the Kinder Egg, ridiculous as it sounds, comes from a real concern about child safety. The frustrating part is that the way these bans are enforced is wildly inconsistent, which means a huge number of Americans are walking around with illegally imported devices and have no idea, while the people who do know are usually making a calculated bet that enforcement at the individual level is unlikely. Which is true until it suddenly isn't.